It's a packed episode with 3 segments on Frida Kahlo, Celine Dion, and Daughters, about a dance for girls and their fathers inside a prison. I'm Thom Powers, and this is Pure Nonfiction. Last month, we hosted our live documentary spotlight in Los Angeles. Over the past 2 episodes, we've been sharing highlights from that event. Now we bring you the final 3 interviews. We begin with the film Frida, a portrait of the Mexican artist Frida Kahlo, told in her own words from letters, diaries, and interviews. Visually, the film taps into photo and film archives from the period, but the boldest choice is to animate the imagery of Kahlo's paintings that were deeply autobiographical. The filmmaker Carla Gutierrez grew up in Peru and moved to the U.S. as a teenager. She has a well-established career as an editor of renowned documentaries on Ruth Bader Ginsburg in RBG and Julia Child in Julia. Frida is her directorial debut. For this project, Carla was keen to collaborate with Mexican creators. One of them is her composer, Victor Hernandez Stumpfhauser. He's primarily worked on fiction films. I sat down with them both for a lively conversation in which Carla describes her search for the film's orgasm moments. Her words, not mine. The film was released on Amazon in the spring. I asked Carla what reactions have stood out to her.
I think that seeing mostly women and not-binary people react to the film has been really special. There was one specific screening that we had that was in San Diego, and we didn't have any other films. It was at a festival. We didn't have any other films playing after Frida. So we actually stayed there for like about an hour talking in the Q&A. And it was this like bilingual Q&A, and then it just became like a group therapy about like, you know, our experiences, what happens to our bodies when we mature as women. And I think that that's exactly kind of the inspiration that I always got from her art, is like how honest and expressive she was in a really raw way about things that are very personal, very intimate, and that just, you know, reflect on our daily lives as regular women. And that's what I saw in that, you know, in that beautiful Q&A that we had, like how it really touched other women to say, oh, what happens to me is also important. I can talk about it. So that has been really special, taking the film out and seeing that.
So, Victor, taking on this Mexican icon, being from Mexico yourself, what did that mean to you to get this assignment?
Well, it was scary, of course, at the beginning, because it's a huge responsibility. And I have to say, at the beginning, because of that, I was, at the very beginning of the process, I tried to go away a little bit from the cliche Mexican sound, trying to explore other things. But in the end, I had to go back to certain roots, you know, that would actually connect with Frida's identity. And I mean, a huge responsibility. When Carla invited me, oh, it's about Frida Kahlo, I was like, oh, okay, that's huge, you know.
Great, huge. But gulp.
Great, but gulp, exactly. And but I mean, it was of course an honor, and we explored a lot. And in the end, one of the main elements that we discovered was the voice. You know, as you heard, it sounds so logical or very obvious, but since we were dealing with Frida's inner voice, and the fact that there's no actual voice recordings of Frida, that then became like the central element of the whole thing, you know? And so how can we portray that? Well, and I ended up recording my wife, as you said, and that was kind of like that process.
So to be clear, she's not quite singing, but humming is
right.
In the music. For the voice of Frida, maybe Carla, you can talk about how you landed on an actor to do that.
Yeah, like Victor said, there's no recordings of Frida, but there's so many in the film. You see so many photos of her and there was so much photography of Frida and some moving images. Um, and that gave us, in a way, gave us some freedom because we were looking for a performance and not necessarily like either someone that had a voice like Frida or the pressure of having to use AI. Like that was never a conversation, which was fantastic. And we worked with a casting director in Mexico. We recorded all the voices in Mexico, even the English voices. And he, just brought us a lot of auditions from people that had a lot of experience in theater. And we were looking for somebody that could really capture this, this woman who had lived through so much and had lost so much and had gone through so much pain, but that also never lost that, quality that she had when she was a little girl of curiosity and passion and a sense for desire of living life intensely. And so we needed somebody that could give us that. And then Fernanda Echevarria just gave us this audition, and it was magic.
Now, Carla, for years you've been an editor and been in the privileged position to like kind of sit back and think like, I wouldn't do it that way. But now you're the director and you're the person who everything lands on.
Yeah.
So what was that like?
I knew that I needed support to be able to have those conversations and like have somebody tell me like, oh, I wouldn't do it that way, which is not what happens. I mean, the conversations of story and they're just so essential to editing. Doesn't start with you putting your hands on the keyboards and like making cuts. It really starts with conversations about theme and then about, what is it that we're trying to do, which is just capture the spirit of a woman, not necessarily, go through a list of what happened to that woman factually, right? And so that's really when you find the story. That's really when you figure out the narrative. So I was both editing and directing, and I knew that I needed a great storyteller to walk with me through the process. So we brought in David Teague, who's, I would say one of the best story minds that we have in our community. So that was a privilege, and I still, I still had moments where like my face was just like, what are you talking about? Or it was mostly like, how come I didn't think about that before? So collaborating with the team was very special. Same with Victor. We tried a lot of different things for the first probably like 3 cues of the film in the first 20 minutes because it was really...
You described to me that you were working with Victor early in the process. It wasn't like you'd cut the whole film and said, now put music to it.
Yeah, we did a lot of testing and a lot of different tries. I mean, the first things, were a lot more classical, and we were staying away from some Mexican sounds. And then we were inspired by, by music, that contemporary music and contemporary Mexican music and like, rockeras, like female, rockers in Latin America. And we just landed in this, he started playing with the sounds underneath Mexican trumpets that are very contemporary, kind of like electronic, and then added the voice on top of it. And it just took us a while to get there, but it just mixed in this, like Frida will be seen as, somebody ahead of her time even now. And we wanted that to also be expressed in the way that we were telling the story, but also in the music, that she's timeless. So something that felt contemporary, but also that play with the Mexican sounds that a lot of new artists are playing with. Well, we said that Frida right now would be listening to or dancing to cumbia to
music.
Mexican like electronic cumbia.
For sure.
Yeah, so we were listening to a lot of that.
Victor, I think for directors, if a director isn't steeped in music, it can be one of the most exciting parts, but also one of the most daunting parts of the process to work with a composer, because you're trying to explain what you want, and maybe you don't have the musical vocabulary to explain what you want, and you get something back, and you don't have the vocabulary to say, what it is else that you're looking for. I mean, what was that process like in this film?
What was that process like?
No, it's great. I mean, it's sometimes I feel like we have to play sort of like therapist in some way, like trying to understand emotions. In this project, we were talking basically emotions, because sometimes talking very technical in music terms also is not great for us as composers, and because then it gets too specific, and with Carla, we talked a lot about emotions, really, and it was really interesting exploring all the concepts that she would tell me, and then I would come up with something. Of course, Frida is this rebellious, loud, strong, person, and those elements, Carla would voice them very clearly. But there was also the vulnerable side of Frida, the fragile aspect of Frida, which we don't really associate so much with her, In the film, you see her going through her miscarriage. Is that how you say it? Miscarriage? And so these very intimate, vulnerable moments, and those require, the right emotional dialogue between Carla and myself to really nail, these very sensitive very, very sensitive topics, and what?
I just now I remember, that's a great question, but now I'm remembering like how we talked about the very sensual segments of the film.
True, also.
And I remember talking to you about it, and then also talking to the animation team, which were we hadn't met them physically, and this team of like female animators in Mexico City, and I was just like, that's the orgasm moment.
The orgasm
like,
moment, yeah.
The climax. And I remember like the first time I said it, we hadn't met in person yet, and they're like the funniest, most amazing, like very expressive women as well. But like I saw them getting really red, and just like, okay, that's how we're just gonna talk about it, because desire was such a and like going after pleasure was such a big thing in the film, that we also talk about that.
We just had this very rich conversation on sex. Basically.
Yeah.
Well, I wish we had more time for that. With just a minute or so left, Carla, can you talk about what the experience was like of showing the film in Mexico for the first time?
I was so scared. Because I'm not Mexican. We did a lot of stuff. I mean, we work with a lot of Mexican talent, but it's obviously it's this huge international symbol that has been, there's so much reaction to her outside of Mexico. And for good reason, a lot of Mexican people we feel very protective, and also get really annoyed at how commercialized she's become. I actually think it's I actually think she would have loved it. All the socks. I'm wearing my Frida socks right now. So I was incredibly nervous to take it there as a Peruvian American filmmaker. But I have to say, we got just the most incredible. There were two reactions that I loved. The director of the Casa Azul Museum came and gave me the biggest hug, and now they're trying to show it for their traveling exhibition. So, thumbs up from the experts and the people that live in the house. So that was amazing. We actually played in the gardens of Casa Azul, and then the great grandson of Diego Rivera came to me. I met him there for the first time, and he said, "This is the first time that I feel close to my great-grandfather." Wow. And that was just it's like, okay, we did our work.
Job well done.
Yeah.
Job well done.
I'm done.
That was Carla Gutierrez, the director of Frida, along with her composer, Victor Hernandez Stumpfhauser. You can watch Frida streaming on Amazon Prime. Now we turn to another film on Amazon called I Am Celine Dion. It's a portrait of the singer as she copes with a rare neurological disorder known as stiff person syndrome that drastically curtails her ability to perform. The film is partly a celebration of all she accomplished as a singer, but it's also a frank look at how she's handled this life-altering illness. The filmmaker, Irene Taylor, has a long career dating back to her Peabody Award-winning film Here and Now about her deaf parents. Her last film was Trees and Other Entanglements, a poetic meditation on nature. She's joined in this conversation by Dr. Paula Barreras, who specializes in rare diseases, including stiff person syndrome.
I got a call from someone named Thom at Sony, who had been working with Celine for only 5 years, who basically had been told by a well-regarded producer who might even be here, who had called me previously and said, Irene, what do you think of Celine Dion? And I said, well, honestly, I don't really think of her very often. I grew up listening to her. Yeah, what's up? So she just said that she thought I would be a good fit, and she knew
because you had just made a film about trees.
Right. So this was not customary for me. This was not customary for me. I have never made a film about really a public figure that is of celebrity fame. Certainly public news I have, but so I was a little taken aback at the interest in me. But I met everyone who Celine worked very closely with, and 20 years, 25 years, 35 years. Finally, several months later, when I talked to Celine, we did talk about trees. It was actually the main thing we talked about, believe it or not. She doesn't really have many of them. They keep dying in her Lake Las Vegas lawn.
Vegas is rough.
Yeah, Vegas is a little rough. So anyway, and that was the start of it. And about a year later, I agreed to make the film, and I'm so glad I did, although I was terrified because I didn't know she was sick.
This is what I just learned today, is that when you embarked on this film, one of the most striking things in the film you weren't aware of.
Yeah, which is why I felt ill-equipped to just make a film about a fabulous woman with a fabulous voice having a fabulous life. And I really didn't know what the story was. But after many a conversation with her and her team, I just had this really good gut feeling that this would be artistically very exciting for me to try something totally different. And it was different from trees. That is for sure.
Well, so one of the contrasts in this film is there's, these incredible montages of her fabulous life on stage. And then there's these very intimate moments shot inside her home where she's, totally un-show business like. And I wonder if you can talk about that, vulnerability that she was willing to show up with.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the first day was a good example. We showed up, just me and my cinematographer. It was always just the two of us in the room. And she had her hair pulled back into a bun. It was a little messy, and no makeup, but pressed shirt and fabulous slacks. So she was very put together, but very relaxed. She was in her home, and I quickly realized this is the stage for the next year of where we're going to make this movie. And the parts you were speaking of where she's on stage, this was a 600-hour archive that she gave me. And I would say maybe 2/3 of it was things shot at shows and outtakes from previous films that they owned. But then a good couple of 100 hours was personal family footage. And it was, making the whole film was an exercise in restraint because her voice is so big, her career is so big, everything's so big. And so I just tried to pull back, and, she made it easy because she was very restrained. I mean, even just hearing her voice, it's restrained.
So, Dr. Barreras, I want to bring you in a minute, but to set that up, I wonder if you can talk to me about a very striking scene in the film where while you're there filming, Celine Dion has this neurological episode that almost leaves her incapacitated. Can you talk about what it meant to be capturing that in the moment?
Well, she had for 2 days been trying to record a song for the first time in several years. It didn't go very well, but at the end, she was satisfied with what she had done. So satisfied that she had simulation. And we went into a room right next door, and within 3 minutes of just starting to have a conversation with her physical therapist, her body started to stiffen, and I suddenly felt the tension in the room go through the roof, and we realized she was going into a full-blown SPS episode where her body stiffened and she was not conscious. I didn't know if she was breathing. I was the sound person for the film, and so I actually used my boom pole and microphone as a tool to see if I could hear her, and I couldn't hear her. And it lasted about 50 minutes, and it was she was completely incapacitated actually, and there were just her bodyguard and her physical therapist and just a couple of managers around on the phone with an EMT and her doctor. So it was, I have in my career, I'd say probably half of my films, I look at, I'm very interested in the senses and the human body, and I have never come close to experiencing something like that as a filmmaker, and it was very upsetting. I wish it hadn't happened to her, but because it did, and we didn't flinch, we did what she had told us to do, which was never ask if you can film, just film. And so we did that, and we cut it down, but it's still a good chunk of the film, and it takes a lot of people by surprise. It's not a scene that's for everybody.
So, Dr. Barreras, what is someone who specializes in rare diseases that many people wouldn't even know what they are, or wouldn't have heard of them? What does it mean to have a film like this out in the world that captures stiff person syndrome?
I think it's so powerful and so important for patients that normally feel isolated. They've never heard of this disease before they are diagnosed with it. Nobody in their families have heard about this. They cannot relate to anybody, to now have something that they can, show to others to explain. Now they're not alone in the world. They have something that they say, I have this. Somebody else has this. I think it's important for patients to be, not alone anymore, and also to raise awareness, to feel that now people are understanding that this is a real disease. Unfortunately, in this disorder, there's a lot of misunderstanding in the medical community, and there's a lot of people that are misdiagnosed as psychiatric because it's just missed. So now, I think people are talking about it more, learning about it more. I think it's been important for the community.
Irene, when you start making this film, you didn't even know this was part of the story. It becomes part of the story. And I mean, when you hear Dr. Barreras talk about kind of what it means for people who live with this, is that something that you or Celine Dion felt conscious of as the film was coming out?
Well, it wasn't lost on me that, her fans would easily say she's a one in a million artist, one in a million voice, right? And Celine told me the first time when she thought that this was what she had, they were diagnosing it. I was with her over the course of the year while she got the diagnosis. And she said, well, Irene, they say it's 1 in a million. And I just thought, what are the chances that someone who is a one in a million, global megastar who's been a star almost her whole life, really she's been on the stage since she was 6. And I thought, what are the chances that someone who we would maybe call very inaccessible, she's not relatable, right? She's not like us, right? Would have this ultra rare, exceedingly rare disease. And what I would say, it was so nice to hear Carla talk about what the main responses are to her film. I would say the main response to this film is that people say they found part of themselves in Celine. So they found her to be relatable. And isn't it something that something so rare made her relatable. And I think it's really about suffering. We see her in this film suffering. We see her ego suffer. We see her body suffer, and she's not even aware of it. So I think most of us have been there at one point or another. So I think that is ironically what became this like universal element in the film, which I think is why people are driven to watch it. It's not just because of this medical scene. It's just they see a new side to someone that they either didn't think of, like me, like I was not a fan, but now or they were fans, and then now they love her even more, of course.
So the film came out in June, and people, if they didn't know before, started to become aware of what Celine Dion has been coping with for many years now. And then later in the summer, she gave one of the greatest performances ever at the Olympics. If people did not see her the opening night of the Olympics, go to YouTube now and watch her singing Edith Piaf in the pouring rain from the Eiffel Tower with all of Paris in front of her.
That's the film I thought I was going to make. I thought I would be like filming things like that,
Given that she's been struggling with all this, can you shed any light on and what made it possible for her to give that performance?
I can't speak to medically what was going on, but clearly over the course of the year, I saw her improving. And so I think that her medications, and she had a new team of caregivers and doctors. And so I think that had a lot to do with it. This is just my personal opinion. I wish Celine were here to listen to me say it, because she could tell me if I was right or wrong. But I do think that the process of making the film, I hate to call it this, but it was to a certain degree a confessional, because she had been lying for so many years. I have a cold, I have a sinus infection, I have to cancel the show. It didn't happen frequently, but when you've got 80,000 people come to a show and you cancel one, that's a pretty big deal. So she was going through this period of lifting this weight off of her shoulders. It's like the film is about her grappling with her new reality, but the truth is she's been living the reality behind a closed door, and only a few people knew about it. And now she just felt so relieved, I think, to let the world know. And she knew that my camera would be that platform. And so it's not like she hired me to do this. I didn't even know, as I said, but it is really remarkable. I think the beginning of the year and about a year later when I finished filming, she just was lighter. She just had a lot more levity about her.
Dr. Barreras, as we wrap this up, for people who know others who are going through, maybe not the specific syndrome, but other rare diseases where there's, it's hard to get, a settled medical opinion about it. What is your message to people in how to support others who have something they have a hard time figuring out?
Well, first, raising awareness is important. Know that these diseases exist. Know that it's important to fund research, to advocate for patients, for families, to get to the right specialists, because these diseases are rare. Specialists do exist, but not everybody is the best doctor for this. So directing people to the right platform and believing patients. I want to emphasize that, because I don't know if you got to see any of this during the film process, but there's a lot of
felt
not
like people
believing.
Didn't believe her. That's why when the episode occurred and the camera was rolling, none of us expected this would happen. Forgive me, but this is proof in the pudding, really. She just said, I think this film will help me. When I showed her the film, I just showed her the scene embedded in the film the first time, and she said, I think this film will help me. It was the first thing she said, and it was because she thought people would not believe her.
That was Irene Taylor, the director of I Am Celine Dion, now streaming on Amazon Prime. She was joined by Dr. Paula Barreras. Our final segment is on the film Daughters. It originated with a project to hold a daddy-daughter dance inside a prison that was spearheaded by Angela Patton from Richmond, Virginia. Angela gave a TED Talk about her experience in 2012. Among the many people who watched that TED Talk was Natalie Rae, who's based in Toronto, and up until then had only made short films. Other directors might have seen Angela mainly as a subject for a film, but Natalie joined forces so they would be co-directors. Natalie sat down with me in Los Angeles, and I asked why that choice was important to her.
I think the TED Talk just showed me what a powerful storyteller she was, and her voice in the first couple of years and working on treatments. I hadn't even reached out to Angela. At the beginning, I was just kind of like immersing myself in what this film could be and doing some writing and things like that on it. And yeah, her voice was just always in my head, and I just felt like doing a collaboration was going to just lead to a richer film, and how much more interesting it would be to share what I knew and learn from her and see if she was interested, in doing it together. And it was really complicated. It's hard to share a creative space like that and come from really different worlds and have different specialties. But I think because of that, everything got tested and tried and, examined by different viewpoints. And so we have a film that's incredibly specific, and also I think is really hitting a universal nerve with people as well.
For those of us who have never been inside a prison as a visitor or any other way, many of us may think that we kind of know what a prison is like because there's so much media, both documentary and fiction films made about prison. What was your experience between what you thought you were getting going into and what it was?
Yeah, I had never been into a prison or jail before, and so your mind, there's lots of stuff that your brain is loaded with just from what we see in the media and everything. But I also just felt like I knew I was going to go in and meet a bunch of lovely human beings and fathers, and that's exactly what I did find. At first, like walking through the hallways when people don't know who you are or what you're doing, it can be intimidating because people are looking at you like you're, a stranger and you're walking through that space. But as soon as I went to that room and met the 25 fathers that were, wanting to be part of this program, everyone was just like so willing and polite and open with me and, made it feel very comfortable.
I wonder if you can talk about your work with the camera person, Michael Cambio Fernandez, because the cinematography is so exquisite. I mean, one of the things that was so lasting for me as an image in this film is when the daughters and their fathers do come together, just the touch between them and how much that's coveted and how he really and any other camera people that he was working with really captured that. Can you talk about what he brought to this project?
Yeah, he brought so much. So Michael Cambio Fernandez is an amazing cinematographer, and I actually was going to work with someone else, and they fell out right before I had flown to DC, and we were preparing to film for a couple of months leading up to the dance. And it was heartbreaking because it was a woman that I really knew and loved to work with, and then I got a call from Cambio's agent who I'd done short form stuff with, and he was like, this is someone new, but he really connects to the story, just take his call. And Cambio got on the phone with me and was like, my parent was incarcerated for 7 years, and I know exactly what it's like to have to go through metal detectors and sit in front and not even be able to touch them, and just go home with that and feel just enclosed in that space and this own psychological sort of incarceration to grow up with of a child impact. And he just put me to tears within a couple minutes of talking to him. And then he also went on to say he was inspired by my work, so I came up doing a lot of dance films and being a dancer myself, and he was like, that is just a place culturally that we've always gone to express freedom and owning our own selves and being in our body, and processing trauma. So he just felt the themes of this film in such a deep spiritual way that he was definitely the right person to work with. And then with the fathers, it was so important for him to be able to go into that circle with the camera down and be like, hey guys, like I'm a dad too. I've got a daughter and I've been on both sides of this dynamic. And then, once the conversation was like up and running, then he would kind of gradually bring the camera up, and it was just amazing. None of the men ever blinched, look in the lens. Like it was just like it was invisible the whole time. But filming the dance, we decided that we would want to do that on 16 millimeter film, which was a huge risk considering, we'd spent years prepping to get approval to do this one event, and this reunion was going to be a couple of minute sequence. But we knew that because this theme of touch and this universal sort of timelessness that we wanted to bring out was so important, we took that risk, and we had 2 cameras, and it was Cambio with one, and another cinematographer with the other. And the only thing we could really control was that we only had 1 or 2 girls, come down the hallway. And Angela really knew kind of how to block that most effectively, and she'd done over 10 of these. So that was amazing because she had filmed them in the past, just not, to this extent. And, Cambio is filming and the camera's shaking, and he's looking at me and he's like, there's tears like full of my iris. I don't know if anything will be in focus, but like pray to God. And it was, I don't know, the footage is incredible, but it still doesn't even, translate. Like the feeling on the day was so powerful. It was hard to get that really into the film, but it's doing its service. It's doing okay.
Certainly, when you watch this movie in a movie theater, like during the quiet moments, you hear a lot of sniffling and people responding
loudly at Sundance. I was like, Jesus! I'm like, be quiet, everyone! Like all you hear.
Well, that's because they all had colds.
But, I
know. So, I started to ask you about the prisons, but in a way that's I should have started elsewhere with the girls, because Angela's work really starts with the girls, and they're really the ones who are centered in this film.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that, and also talk about the sensitivity that goes with filming people in highly emotional states, and other
and
with other
little babies, like minors and like little
That's
children.
Right, yeah.
Well, I think that it being from the girl's perspective was a reason why me and Angela like bonded, and why she really wanted to work with me, because for me this was a story about the wisdom that comes from young girls, and the belief that like as we pass down wisdom through the generations, that the young ones may have the answers, and they typically are the ones that make a change in the world. And so we just really thought that if we followed the girls' experience, and once we met Aubrey, we were like, throw out everything we shot for the last 3 years. We had filmed so many interviews and so much backstory, thinking maybe the film would have this wider contextual beat. And then we met our girls in 2019 when we finally got approval to film the full program. And, it was just such a privilege to be able to work with Aubrey and Jayana and Santana and Rosiah. And really, with those girls, it was just about spending time and letting them know that this, if they wanted to be part of the film, it was their film. What did they feel like needed to be shared? What did their moms feel like was important? And just letting them know that they can, guide the way, really. And they certainly did. We have like moments like my first conversation with Santana. I'm doing this like interview with her, this conversation in a car. It's going on for about an hour, and it's so intense that like, let's take a break. Let's come back tomorrow. She's like, no, Natalie, sit back down. I have more to say, and I'm going to ask you some questions. Perfect. So we go on for like 2-3 hours. We're like running out of memory cards. Cambio's like, my arms are shaking. I gotta keep going. I'm like, if she wants to keep going, she's 10. We're going to keep going.
Wow.
And that was one of the most powerful interviews I've ever, been privileged to like capture and have a conversation like that. And similarly with Aubrey, a lot of her sequences tap into her inner world and her imagination, because at 5, you really speak in dreams and nightmares and your feelings in a more subconscious kind of free state. So she took me around tours of all these like places her and her dad had spent time, and really wanted to take me on these journeys of her, where they played, and her memories and her dream space. So we just wanted to try to help an audience, get into her world and her mindset.
It takes a long time to make films, so these girls who were 5 or 10 when you were filming them now are a few years older.
Yeah, Aubrey's about to turn 11 in a couple of weeks.
So what has that experience been like for them to, see the film reach audiences?
Mm-hmm. I think really powerful. I think, over the years, we would look at cuts and footage together, because it was important for us to also get their feedback as we were growing the story and, having this more of a coming of age film. So it was nice for them to be old enough to actually feedback on their stories over time, which was great. But then this summer, truly, they were nervous, right? It was like so exciting. They were really pleased with the film. And then it really coming out and going back to school and it being there for the world. I think there was some real nerves about that. Obviously, having your own, like, okay, everyone's going to know that your father's incarcerated. But in the last month or so, I just keep getting, they're like, we're helping thousands and millions of people. And they're just getting so many beautiful cards and messages, so many girls their age that didn't feel comfortable sharing this. And it's millions of kids in America, like with mass incarceration, we've affected generations of youth, and we're not talking about how many hundreds of kids in any school are going through this silently,
So you make a choice in the film. It doesn't end when the dance happens.
Yeah.
I mean, many people thinking about what the structure of this film be like, oh, they have a dance, it's emotional, roll credits.
Yeah.
But you deliberately kind of, follow what comes after that and the emotions that people have to process after that. Can you talk about the intentionality behind that?
Yeah, and that was a really big decision in the process, because we knew we had something really powerful and we could like end the film there. And even in edits in the last couple of years, there was a lot of feedback going, it's such an emotional crescendo. How can you keep people going after that? People just need to walk away and go to sleep. It's like so emotional. But that is not real life, and that is not the journey of these girls. And they have to get up the next day and continue on for years. And so it may take a little bit more for the audience to like go through that and get some more stamina, but that's what we need from people, and that's what these girls need and deserve. So it's a little bit of an atypical structure, but I'm so glad that we've been able to push through with that, and like Netflix was supportive of that, and all of our layers of everyone that came onto the project the last year. Now we're getting like so much feedback that Act 3 is the most important part of the film, and truly we would have not known if the dance made any impact if we weren't willing to see what happened for the 4 or 5 years afterwards. So I'm glad that we stuck it out.
That was Natalie Rae speaking about her film Daughters that she co-directed with Angela Patton. The film is available on Netflix. I want to thank all the guests from Documentary Spotlight for sharing their insights. Our next Documentary Spotlight live event will take place in London, England on November 22nd. If you'd like to follow what we're doing, please subscribe to our newsletter, Doc Voices, written by Bella Racklin. You'll find it on Substack. If you want to advertise to our 40,000 readers, send an email to listen@purenonfiction.net. Thanks to our team, series producer Hannah Nordenswan and web designer Cross Strategy. Our theme music is composed by Andre Williams, and our executive producer is Raphael Inehausen. I'm Thom Powers. Follow us on Instagram and visit our website at purenonfiction.net.